ダンジョンの奥には知られざる世界が広がっています。
Adventurer turned dungeon manager, the fantasy manga Dungeon People is confirmed to get an anime without revealing any details. Dungeons, a staple of the fantasy world, an area that is always portrayed to be mysterious in its working, with every other series only scratching the surface when talking about how a dungeon works. But here comes a series that will not only delve into how the dungeon works, but also show the management side of it. Dungeon People is a light-hearted fantasy comedy series following Clay, an overpowered thief who is in search for her lost father. When Clay delves into the dungeon deeper than any adventurer has ever gone, she is offered a job by the dungeon's caretaker. Now, instead of exploring, Clay must learn how to interview new monsters, set traps, and position slimes around the dungeon. Dungeon People is an underrated gem that has a uniquely fresh take on the fantasy realm as it dissects a dungeon, showing its working, what the monsters do, what happens to the monsters that die, and how does everything reset itself, shining a spotlight on the daily life of the dungeon managers who support one end of the world from the shadows. A lot of the story is on Clay's monologues and her progress of getting stronger, involving her interactions with monsters, learning about new things, or an infodump on her thoughts. Clay's job mainly revolves around the management side, where we see her replenishing the contents of the treasure chest in the dungeon, alongside viewing how OP Clay is. The fights are a mix of action and strategy, with the action lacking in terms of packing a punch, but the cross of the fighting and the strategy is certainly entertaining. The characters are interesting. Our MC Clay is a cool-headed, no-nonsense OP thief whose only current motivation is to find her father, and in order to do so wants to get strong enough to clear the dungeon, but is now working as part of the dungeon management. Her logic and rational attitude works in contrast to the lazy admin who is cutesy but super strong. We also are introduced to goblins, golems, dragons, and other monsters that work there, but most of the story revolves around the admin and Clay. The plot has a cute and simple art style that I really like, and the world building is surprisingly complex for how simplistic the theme comes across, going deep, delving into the details on the dungeon, the working of the gemstones left when monsters are defeated, how the management of the monsters in a dungeon works, and so much more. I really enjoy the idea of a story revolving around the managing of a dungeon, and this series really hits the mark while taking a realistic view of the nature of a dungeon. Having to take inventory of items in chests, manage traps, organize the monsters, and so much more are all explained in a concise and interesting way. If you like dungeon RPGs having a setting showcasing the workings of a dungeon with most of it being lighthearted and fun, then this show is certainly a must-watch. If you enjoyed this video, then do consider subscribing to my channel for more.